Hello everyone, and welcome to Hill Street. Today's story is, my brother started collecting These Weird Dolls by Haunted Hobby Box 1997. If you end up enjoying this story, please leave a like. And if you enjoy hearing stories from me, please subscribe and become a resident of Hill Street and let me know how I'm doing in the comments. Now, let's get to this nightmare. Names changed because I'm worried that my entire family is in big trouble. First, I want to say that my family has always tried to support my little brother Charlie's creative side. Even if we don't get it, the town where I grew up is small and boring, and my childhood was pretty uneventful. My parents are the nicest people you'd ever meet, and what you see is what you get. My mom is a minimalist, so there's no clutter anywhere, but she lets my brother have anything he asks for, as long as he keeps it in his own room. To help set this up, my parents had Charlie really late in life. My mom thought she was going through the change, but it turned out she was pregnant. Nothing about my brother has ever been expected. He's 9 and I just turned 25. But even though I'm old practically enough to be his mom, he's so much smarter than me, and it wouldn't surprise me if it turns out he's a genius. And while my life is pretty boring, I work the finance department at a car dealership, and both my parents are accountants. Charlie is very artsy. He goes through a lot of hobbies. He was really into writing his own music for a while, and playing it on the piano my grandma left us when she died. After that, he started painting. The paintings were weird. I'm trying to be kind, and I admit I don't know about art, but that's what they were. I thought they were abstract at first, which I understand to be just random shapes and colors and splatters, like that artist who used to shake his brush at the canvas. But when I looked closely at them, I could see things in them, like faces or buildings, and even though they were hard to make out, I always felt like I was looking at a city or a faraway place I couldn't identify. I try not to think about it too much because I still get weird dreams whenever I do. Anyway, I would tell Charlie I loved his work, and I even framed one to keep on my desk. But yeah, I was relieved when he moved on. He asked me to burn the picture I kept on my desk at work, and I felt bad because he'd worked so hard on it. But I have to admit, it's been a relief not having to look at that thing anymore. It was all red and blue and purple, and from far away, it looked like an abstract forest, but something about it always gave me the chills. I feel like there were faces hiding in the branches, and that they were watching me. Which brings us to his latest hobby. A few weeks ago, I picked Charlie up from school because my dad was having a small outpatient thing and my mom had to drive him due to the anesthesia. I figured since I had the afternoon off, I'd take Charlie for some curly fries at the food truck he loves. We got our food and found a spot to eat outside, and when he threw his backpack up on the table, this tiny little doll fell out of one of the pockets. Doll might not even be a good word. It was more like one of those old plastic army soldiers, if anyone remembers the bucket of soldiers from the Toy Story. Only this was even smaller. Before I got a good look, Charlie snatched it back up and shoved it into his pocket. He refused to let me see it. I asked if it was something he was collecting. He shrugged and said something like that. I should also mention, he's never really been interested in toys. Even when he was a toddler, all he cared about was making things, finger painting, singing little songs in his own made-up language, making stuff out of Play-Doh, etc. My dad is really into cars and tried to get him some Hot Wheels, but Charlie just ended up taking them apart and trying to melt the metal and plastic to make sculptures. I promised not to make fun of him if he would let me see the doll, but he changed the subject and I didn't want to make him mad. He doesn't have a temper, but if you say something that offends him, he'll give you the silent treatment for days. Okay, this part I'm not proud of. After I dropped Charlie off at home, my dad was feeling pretty loosey from the anesthesia, and my mom was taking care of him. So I stuck around to help out with my brother, cooking dinner, making sure he did his homework, and got to bed on time. After Charlie was asleep, I went through his coat pocket and found the doll. It was about an inch tall, and it definitely looked homemade. It might have been melted plastic or some really shiny clay. Here's the weird part. It was very detailed for how small it was. It looked like a tiny boy with a red shirt, blue jeans, and a Steelers hat. He even had red freckles on his cheeks. I know Charlie made this thing. It had his handwork all over it. The face was probably painted using the head of a needle, and if anyone has the patience for something like that, it's Charlie. I wanted to tell him this is the most impressive work yet and ask how he did it, but of course I couldn't because he'd know I took it. I know I should have put it back, but there was just something about it that fascinated me. I went home and looked at it with my magnified makeup mirror. I couldn't find a single blob of paint that was misplaced, and the sculpting was so perfect. I held it up against the hummingbird figurine my friend gave me from her vacation in Germany, and even though that figurine is beautiful, I can find little flaws and brushstrokes if I look hard enough. A few days later, I went to my parents' house for our usual Sunday dinner, and the second we were alone, Charlie cornered me on the couch and said, "What did you do with it?" His cheeks were puffed out and his lips were pursed, which was something I used to do when I was a little kid. But instead of looking cute, Charlie looks truly angry when he does it. His eyes get dark, and even though he's just a kid, you feel like he's going to do something bad if he doesn't get his way. Something really bad. "You can't lie to me," he said before I could answer. All his life, we had this pact that we don't lie to each other. This means I'm always the one to end up confessing something, and Charlie rarely says anything at all. This time, I tried a different tactic. You tell me what it is, and I'll tell you where I put it. "It's a toy." "It's not a..." I heard my parents moving around in the kitchen, and I lowered my voice to a whisper. "We both know it's more than just a toy, Charlie." He didn't say anything for a minute. He seemed anxious, which is unlike him. He was trying to hide how desperate he was to have this damn thing back, and I knew that for once, he didn't know how to outsmart me. I was surprised when he took my hand and led me to the hobby box he keeps in his closet. He keeps it padlocked, even though nobody has any reason to care about what he keeps in there. And my parents always respected my privacy growing up, and they do the same for him. Inside the box were mostly things I'd expect, a cheap acrylic paint set, some polymer clay and wires, broken pen caps, bits of broken bottles that my brother probably picked up from the sidewalk. Typical creative Charlie stuff. But then he unwrapped a scrap of cloth and showed me 3 more of those little dolls. There was a really mean-looking dog with its teeth bared and a leash dangled from his collar, a lady dressed up like a chef, and a man in a suit and tie with a bald head and a beer belly. I snatched the last one up before Charlie could stop me, and I held it up in a beam of sunlight. "Is this supposed to be Mr. Wagner?" I asked. I was dumbfounded. Mr. Wagner had been my principal when I was in elementary school, and he retired a year earlier when Charlie was in the 4th grade. I remembered him when he had more hair. Charlie was angry again, and he grabbed the doll and closed it in his fist so I wouldn't see it anymore. "He's bad, Mary," he told me. "He's not what you think." Mr. Wagner was never what you'd call nice. He was your stereotypical, no-nonsense, yell at the kids in the hall, old crank. But Charlie and I were always honest with each other, and I could see that he meant it. "Charlie," I began, "what are you trying to say?" Charlie didn't tell me, but I found out when my parents turned on the 8 o'clock news after dinner. Mr. Wagner was a suspect of his own wife's murder, and he'd gone off the grid. Police were asking for anyone who saw him to contact them immediately. "What is going on in that school?" my mother said as I helped her with the dishes. "First that little boy goes missing, and now this." She didn't look at me, or she might have seen the look on my face. My blood was ice cold. "What boy?" I asked. "It's the saddest thing," my mother said. "Jimmy Verlind disappeared on some camping trip with his parents." She lowered her voice to a whisper, even though nobody else was in the room to hear her. "They think he drowned." My hands were shaking when I set down the dish I'd been washing and grabbed my phone. I typed Jimmy Verlind into my search engine, and I recognized the face staring back at me immediately. Red freckles on his cheeks and a black Steelers cap. I ran up the stairs to Charlie's room. He heard me coming and he tried to slam the door shut, but I shouldered my way inside and demanded an explanation. He shielded the closet with his body so I couldn't get to the box with all his art supplies and those creepy figurines. "What did you do?" I didn't recognize my own voice. "How did you do it?" He burst into tears, which only happens once in a blue moon. His face got all pink and he started sobbing, and he told me that Jimmy had been tormenting him since kindergarten. He put a dead frog in my brother's sandwich, and my brother finally just snapped. He said he was tired of all the bad people, and it wasn't fair, and he had to do something. I tried to get more information out of him, but my parents came upstairs to see what all the commotion was about. I panicked. I didn't know what to say to them. On my drive home, I passed a missing dog poster, and the dog looked just like the snarling dog figurine Charlie made. Now, I don't know what to do. I still have that figurine of the boy I now realize is Jimmy Verlind. Only when I came home tonight, it wasn't where I left it, on the bathroom counter. It had fallen onto the floor, and his face has changed. His eyes are wide, and his fingers, which used to be open, are clenched into fists. I could swear he looks afraid. I shouldn't be posting any of this, But I know Reddit is one place Charlie will never know I've shared his secret. My parents don't let him have a smartphone, and he's like the only kid in the world who doesn't care about technology. Someone please help me. My brother is not a bad kid, and I'm scared to go to the authorities. First of all, they'll never believe me, but if Charlie has left any evidence that he's involved in these disappearances, I'm scared of what will happen to him. There's a murderer in my brother's hobby box, and a class bully in my teapot where I put him for safekeeping. I don't know how to fix this.